Never stops. Okay, I'd like to call the Board of Education meeting to order on October 11th, 2012. And the first order of business is to review and approve the agenda. Could I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And now we ask anyone who would like to comment before the Board of Education is more than welcome to come up now. Seeing that there is no one there, we'll move on to the consent agenda. And we have a number of policies that we had discussed and agreed to go on the consent agenda this time. So could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. We do need to remove policy 41153 from the consent agenda and move it down to, I guess, action items. It's the revision is in your blue folder.
Okay.
It'll become 5B.
Okay, could I have a motion to move policy 4115.3 to action items?
So moved.
I have a second?
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, then I would now ask if anyone has any objections or comments on the consent agenda?
No.
If not, could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Good. Moving on to reports and recognition. The board chair has no report this evening, so I will turn it over to the superintendent.
Good evening. I'm pleased to report. We were discussing before the meeting a little bit about we were talking about the college fair, and which is a terrific event held every year. I'm pleased to report that there was a very successful college fair last evening. By way of summary, 213 colleges and universities were represented. In addition to this, there were representatives of programs, gap year programs, other alternative programs, and military who also participated. This event, as you know, is co-sponsored by the Wilton Public Schools and the Ridgefield Public Schools. And it was attended by an interesting number, 1,492. Yes, on Columbus Day. I don't know if that was the high school principal attempting some humor, but it was successful. An event like this, I was talking earlier with Ms. Finkelstein, I think it requires an enormous amount of preparation. On that note, we were fortunate to have the support of 12 high school student guides. You have students who are helping people negotiate the fair. We also had 10 Ridgefield High School student guides or dinner servers. They provide some dinner for the college representatives. There were 14. Ms. Finkelstein's in charge. One of her jobs is to coordinate volunteers. There were 14 high school PTSA College Center parent volunteers helping out last night. 6 parking attendants, 2 police officers, 3 shuttle buses, and a partridge. No. And all the Ridgefield High School and Wilton High School counselors. So we really salute Christine Collins, our Wilton High School College and Career Center coordinator, for her work in planning this very important evening. I know many of us over the years have attended, and it's really a great opportunity for students and parents to learn more about college possibilities, and I think it's always been a highlight for many of us. Second item, wanted to talk a little bit about math in focus. As you know, we've been very excited about the rollout of the new mathematics program. Information sessions were held this last week for parents of students at Miller Driscoll last Tuesday, kindergarten parents, Cider Mill Wednesday, Middlebrook Thursday. The Math and Focus training specialists served as presenters for each of these programs, and all sessions were well attended. I was talking with Ms. Jensen Gerner today, and she was commenting on the extraordinary number of very interested and involved parents who attended. And Cider Mill, I believe, also had a very robust turnout. I think that speaks volumes for the kinds of parental collaboration that we enjoy in this district. By all accounts, I think the parents received a helpful overview of the Singapore math philosophy and the implementation of this program in our schools. This week, that was last week, this week our teachers participated in 2 days of training. We had the staff development day on Monday where they had a full day of math and focus training, and today or was it Tuesday?
All week.
All week there have been demonstration lessons by some of the consultants from Math and Focus and follow-up to professional development. These were given to teachers in grades kindergarten, 3, 4, 5, and the middle school math teachers. So again, I really applaud the work that principals and math ILs, Tim and his staff have been doing to try and help get people fully briefed on the program, the philosophy, and how it will work. So I think that speaks volumes. The third item, you may remember, some of you heard Alan November, who was our keynote presenter during the opening convocation, in which we partnered with Weston Public Schools. On Tuesday, last Tuesday, October 2nd, a week ago, Matt, Tim, the technology instructional leaders, and one of our high school students participated in the November Learning Institute. It's an ongoing program that we are involved in. Mr. November presented some ideas for teaching students to direct their own learning and take ownership of their work. And for those of you who had a chance to, I don't know, did any of you see his presentation?
Yeah.
But the huge importance, I think, that we're placing on helping students learn to become increasingly responsible for their own learning. Our student representative explained how he uses social media and various websites for his schoolwork and his own personal learning. The 17 participating school districts then worked to design or redesign a piece of curriculum to embody a core concept presented by Mr. November. The Wilton team focused on how we could globalize a unit of instruction to connect Wilton students with students and experts around the world. So I think each day that seems there are other opportunities for us for utilizing technology as a very powerful learning tool. So we're really pleased that this continues to gather momentum. The fourth item I have, I'm pleased to announce, I've announced previously that we had, I believe, 8 National Merit semifinalists that we announced last month. We're pleased to announce that 29 of our Wilton High School seniors have been named Commended Scholars in the 2013 National Merit Scholarship Program. The commended students are recognized for exceptional academic promise demonstrated by their outstanding performance on the qualifying test. They will not, however, continue in the competition for National Merit Scholarships, so they're just below most of them the cutoff point for the National Merit competition. Over 1.5, as you know, million students took the PSAT as National Merit qualifying test last October, and entered into the program. And the 16,000 were designated as semifinalists, and there were 34,000, again, out of 1.5 million, high performers who earned the commended student designation. Pleased to announce and congratulate the students who were so named. Please forgive me if I mispronounce a name. I think I have Adriana M. Ackerman, James Bazillion, James A. Damon, Matthew J. Diamond, Savannah N. Eason, Elizabeth M. Forster, Emily Friedman, April M. Garbuz, Sasha Gillis, David Gummins, Tristan H. Haas, David E. Hernandez, John H. Jankowski, Lauren N. Kozakowicz, I believe. Kozakowicz, anyone?
Kozakowicz.
Kozakowicz, thank you. I apologize, Lauren. Aaron Lee, Kevin Murphy, Eric Noonan, Joshua Olin, Isagni Palakapak, Sarah Purley, Jason Petro, Allison Schaefer, Matthew Schneidman, Sanjana Sekar, Alosha Southern, Maya Srivastava, Brendan Sweeney, Kathleen Ward, and Megan Ward. So again, the number we had was 29. It's the second highest in the this many committed students, number of committed students in the past 23 years. So our congratulations again to these students, to their teachers, and to their parents who've supported them on their journey. So it's really a great thing to have so many students achieving at such high levels in this class. So.
Terrific. All right. Committee reports. Anyone have committee reports?
I do.
Yes. Okay. Laura?
I just came from the fiber optic committee for the town. There's a representative from the Board of Education, Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, in the library, as well as Sandy Denny's. And I just want to say how great the staff is at the town hall and the library, and especially at the schools. It's a lot of work for all of them, and they're so patient and very knowledgeable. And Matt just sells the idea of how important this is to the schools going forward with their agenda. Anyway, but we're going for that. We're going to have a public meeting. It will be announced and publicized soon. Public information meeting before we make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen.
And we will be preparing. We'll be preparing. Matt and Ken, we've been working on some materials to share with the board on this, based on the conversations we've had.
And thank you for all that you do.
Good. Karen?
I have two. The Energy Commission, on October 29th, Energy Commission Chair Bruce Hampson and I will be, and Ken Post will be meeting with Energy Education to hear their proposal on how the district might be able to reduce its energy consumption through behavior changes. So it'll be interesting to see what their proposal would be and what they think we're going to be able to do. And the second is, once again, the Facility Steering Committee. At our meeting next week, we will hear, or we will see, the proposal that Hoffman Associates has drawn up for the schematic design of the Middlebrook roof and the Comstock roof. And then with respect to the restroom renovations, the objectives that we drew up and approved at our last meeting were actually included in the text of the request for proposal that was sent out to 5 architectural firms. Those architectural firms, we met yesterday afternoon at 3:30 and walked the high school in Middlebrook so that they could take a look at the different styles of restrooms. And their proposals are due back to the First Selectman's office on the 16th.
Moving along well. I just have just one. We have the legal services evaluation, and that has been sent out to a number of you, and I appreciate your returning them. And at some point in the next, Molly has sent them out. In the next several weeks, I'll just compile them, and we will then have the evaluation complete for this year. It'll be done well before the orientation, the organizational meeting. So with that, and you had none? No reports?
No.
Chris? Okay.
You've been very busy.
It sounds like it.
No, I would like to emphasize what Gary said about the college fair last night. It was just a fabulous event, and Christine Collins, I know, has already started work on next year's fair, and she's just like this phenomenal force behind the college fair, and it all paid off last night.
Terrific. All right, Wilton Public Schools Student Assessment.
As Tim comes up, and go ahead, the assessment report, which is going to be, I believe, next month, Tim, in November, first meeting in November, is a long report, and so we thought it would be important, and Tim will get into it in just a minute, to share a few thoughts about some of our views about responsible assessment looks like, and also to give some other background information so that when we have the report for the board, it's not such we're trying to find ways to make it user-friendly and informative, and not something that drags on and on. But so by having some of the information tonight, we thought it would make the report smoothly and to members. So,
Thank you, Dr. Richards. The mission tonight in educating the board is to talk about our philosophy around our assessment practices here in our district. And then to discuss with you recent changes in Connecticut's accountability system as it relates to state reporting of results for both the Connecticut Mastery Test and the Connecticut Academic Performance Test. In terms of talking about responsible assessment, I would love to take credit for many of the ideas that we'll discuss tonight, but in fact, the outcomes that I'm about to share with you are the result of the work of the Tri-State Consortium. The group worked together here in the last 2 years to develop a position statement on what quality, purposeful assessments look like. And in doing so, they've crafted a document that I think has great merit and is very useful, not only for high-performing school districts like those that Tri-State represents, but any school district. And Dr. Richards is correct. This is a good opportunity just to flavor the conversation that will take place a month from now when we present the results of our wide range of assessments that were given in the 2011-2012 school year. One final sidebar, I'd like to commend the work of Lynn Driver again, who is our testing coordinator. In fact, Lynn was quick to spend time with me this week in helping me to prepare this report. So she's a great resource, and we're very lucky to have her as part of our team. So let's take a look at responsible assessment. And to a large extent, this will feel a bit professorial, but we do want to go through and just discuss some of the key tenets, some of the key ideas around what quality assessments look like. And we'd like to think that here in the Wilton Public Schools that we understand these concepts and we try to apply these methodologies in the work that we do. So when you talk about the purpose of responsible assessments, initially we're looking at opportunities for students, as you might suspect, to demonstrate their understanding of content, concepts, and skills. And as a result of that, that information provides great feedback. And we often talk about the feedback that it provides for us as educators, but in fact, it provides feedback to the students who are in fact involved in the learning environment, and that helps improve their learning experience. Now, we do as educators take the time to generate and analyze a wide range of assessments, and a primary goal of that work, beyond trying to influence individual student learning, is to see how that can better inform our instructional practices to better meet the needs of students. And that plays out also in terms of the impact that it would have on our curriculum and instructional practices. So that information ultimately helps us gauge the extent to which students acquire knowledge, apply knowledge, and create knowledge. Now, responsible assessments can take a variety of forms. They may be diagnostic. And by that we mean those assessments that really look at identifying individual students' strengths or growth areas. When we talk about formative assessments, these are best described as the in-process assessments. We're looking at feedback that both informal and formal assessments can provide us that will help us adjust instruction to meet the needs of students. So, think in terms of a classroom environment where perhaps a quick quiz is given or a conversation takes place with a student or a group of students, teachers getting that feedback and adjusting their instruction to meet the individuals or group-oriented goals of the students. And then a summative assessment is indeed the culminating activity, if you will, the assessment that measures the ultimate outcome of the success of the student. Now, it's important to recognize that more is better. I know Math in Focus, the mantra is less is more, but on the assessment front, more is better in terms of the broader you can have a range of assessments in working with our students, you get a better sense of how they're doing and how they're performing. Standardized tests, which are often scrutinized in the public and, of course, by educators, are useful in looking at large groups of students, and it does help us to make comparisons with other groups, other districts, and identify patterns within and across groups of students. So if you think back to last year in our report on the Connecticut Mastery Test, for example, you'll hear us talk about particular grade levels and the success they have, and we'll also talk about how we perform compared to our demographic reference group. Very often, these are standardized tests that give us that opportunity. But a real point of emphasis, increasingly, in which, by the way, Tri-State is emphasizing in its standards, is the use of performance-based assessments. These are, I guess the word you could use is providing students with an opportunity to demonstrate what they know and what they can do. So you're really getting inside the problem-solving process, problem-based learning opportunities. Examples might be essays that students write around a problem, or experiments they conduct in science, portfolios that are developed that have a range of student work, other type demonstrations that really put students in an active role. If you were to go into a high school social studies class, for example, you might see a debate taking place between students. This can, in fact, be used as a performance-based assessment. So although the standardized tests we give are very important, these performance-based assessments in some ways can provide a richer opportunity to really understand how students are obtaining the information that they need, and then most importantly applying it to various situations. Now, the characteristics of assessments that we use, if they are indeed useful to us, is they need to be valid, which, as you may know, indicates that the test measures what it says it measures. A valid test. It measures what it says it measures. Reliable. That's a term that implies consistency, that you could take the test over again and get similar results. Or, in fact, a group of students could take the same test, and there would be a consistency in terms of their performance over time. And, of course, meaningful and authentic are qualities that would reflect responsible assessments. Assessments may be quantitative or qualitative. You hear we use those words often in our strategic plan work. They're self-explanatory. And again, as I just talked about, we're really looking to balance our assessment practices between standardized assessments and relevant and meaningful performance-based assessments. You have to be mindful that students vary in their backgrounds, including language differences and perhaps their abilities and disabilities. So, as is often the case in our work in influencing teaching and learning, you really do need to look at the individual qualities that a learner brings to an assessment situation and take that into account. One of the things you also have to look at are, and it really goes to what I just talked about, the variations that can take place when you look at assessments. People learn in different ways and at different rates. So a responsible assessment honors this reality by, and you hear us say this is a snapshot in time when we take an assessment of a student or groups of students. We're also emphasizing growth over time. And then, when appropriate, trying to compare an individual student's performance to grade level and or content area standards. So as professionals, just trying to bring some closure to this, and in terms of the board's understanding of our work, it's important to realize that assessments have strengths and limitations. In every kind of assessment we review, strengths and limitations. And obviously, those of us who are using that information must have a strong understanding of how that assessment can be useful in our work. It's also our responsibility, as you might suspect, to provide ongoing professional development to our staff members in how to interpret and analyze assessment data. You know, it's interesting, when we just had a large cohort of new teachers arrive here in our district. And I often wonder if we make assumptions that they bring the skill set that's necessary for them to be successful. In other words, can they write and develop a reliable assessment? Too often we assume that that's the case. And this is one of the most complex undertakings we take as educators, is to develop appropriate and useful assessments. So we need to look at that, and we need to grow in our practice. And then, of course, as part of that, we need to review and revise. We need to monitor the assessments that we're using and make sure that they're impacting our ability to understand the needs of students, and also to create, again, opportunities for us to look at our instructional practices and make sure they're up to date and useful for our students. So, trying to save a little time here in a month, we can get right into the results. Just wanted to go through this with you and give you a sense of just where we stand in terms of our philosophy around assessments and how they're useful to us.
Can we take, I think that would be a good time right now before you go into the next section to ask the board in terms of, you know, what your thoughts were about this. Do you have questions about what Tim was talking about? I think the reason we thought it's important to do this is that we believe as educators, and I think there's an abundance of data and evidence to support this, that there's a real superficial understanding about assessment in this country, and it's taken on, I think it's had some very serious consequences, and we think our boards historically, I think, have looked at assessment in a thoughtful way, and that's why I think it is important for you to know the approach we take as educators, and to, if you have questions about some of the things Tim just provided, I thought some very important information. One of the things, as he mentioned, that the Tri-State Consortium has been doing for a number of years, I'm really pleased that Tim's been a part of this work, as have others. The principals have been involved in this, is to try to come to terms with how do you create quality assessments that truly measure, as Tim said, that are valid, that are reliable, and that tell you and the student information about what they know and can do. And I think many of us came up, some of us, I'll date myself, came up in a time where the multiple guess tests were one of the major ways that learning was assessed. And I think we have come so far beyond that point. And I think this issue that he talked about with formative assessment versus summative, I don't know if that made sense to you. I heard a great analogy, as kind of a cooking analogy, is that formative assessment, and Tim did a nice job, I think, explaining it, is if you're cooking, is tasting the soup or the pasta sauce to see if it needs more salt. And then based on that, making adjustments for the summative, which is the meal that is served. And I thought that was really a nice way of explaining a concept which, we throw out a lot of this jargon to the public. But I think we have come a long way, and our staff have done a lot of work on figuring out how do you not make assessment be, remember in college when you'd have one exam, a final exam. But we think it's important for learners and teachers to test along the way, to assess. It may not be a written test, but other ways of assessing what students know before, so that we can, as Tim said, we can make the adjustments. I think that's really huge.
And just a quick comment in reflecting on Dr. Richards' comments that I didn't touch on earlier. And when we look at performance-based assessments, our teachers have developed increasingly a great skill set in using different metrics and different evaluation tools to bring more consistency to the practice of evaluation. So, for example, if you're looking at a performance-based assessment, a project-based learning experience students have to develop, you'll often see rubrics attached to that, or very clearly defined expectations around how the project will be assessed. So that's useful to students. It's interesting how that work on the front end of a project by sharing the assessment process actually impacts student learning. So really important to recognize that we're working very hard on making sure that, for example, we have a number of teachers, for example, teaching U.S. history. And if there's a common instructional experience, then we have to work hard to make sure that the assessments we develop are being utilized in a fair and consistent way by all our teachers in terms of evaluating those tasks. Very, very complex and difficult work. I think you can appreciate that.
Questions or comments or thoughts you have?
Could you please expand a little bit on what you mean by accounting for variation in cultural and socioeconomic backgrounds? How does that factor into how a student is assessed?
Well, to a large extent, Wilton is a somewhat homogeneous environment in terms of our student makeup. But we do have students who, for example, may come out of economically disadvantaged environments or arrived to us with a varied cultural background. So you have to be careful to recognize how those factors could influence a child's ability to perform well on a particular assessment. You may have heard, for example, in the public arena, conversations around how inner city students may be impacted in terms of their ability to be successful on the SATs. So you just can't make assumptions that students arrive at the testing door having an equitable background to be prepared for that test. There are factors that influence how a student may perform, their language, their reading ability, the extent to which they've been had the opportunity to be involved in enrichment, learning type experiences in their childhood, so on and so forth. So
I heard
be
an
mindful
example.
of that.
I'm sorry. I heard an example of that years ago that I thought struck home, and again, I think that this country's come a long way. There are certain things like there was a test question that a key part of the question had to do with the concept of hedge, a hedge. Now, in a lot of inner city kids' experience, there's no such thing. They don't know. They've not seen a hedge. There are not a lot of hedges in Bed-Stuy. And so that when you have a test question that talks about the hedge, you've created an obstacle for a kid who doesn't have that kind of background. So again, they're talking about in generic terms or in broader terms the responsible assessment, and I think they've gone a long way to try to make the language of some of the assessments something that helps measure, adds to the validity. So you're really measuring what a kid knows, or are you measuring vocabulary? And sometimes it can
But in
affect.
our current schools,
Mhm.
do we have different assessments at play within any given classroom, given that a child may not have English as a first language, or
Mhm. Well, I
are
think
all
the-
kids graded
yeah,
on the same?
that's a good
scale?
question.
Well, I was just going to say, I think our teachers are adept at looking at the background that students bring to a situation, and they may modify or adjust is probably a better word, an assessment to meet the needs of students. And where this may be most obvious isn't necessarily due to cultural or socioeconomic differences. It may be in terms of the learning challenges that a student may bring to a particular classroom. For example, at the high school, we actually have some of our more challenged learners in the same classroom as students who are perhaps on what might be described as a college prep level. So within the same room, you could adjust assessments to meet the needs of that particular learner based on the challenges they may face. This in many ways is what happens with the development of an individual education plan. It could impact the assessment protocols that you use.
Special educators, I think I've said this to Ann, and she knows this to be true too, and principals as well, is that there were special educators have been years ahead of regular mainstream classroom educators in terms of assessment, because they, by law, are dealing with individualized programs. And we talked about differentiated instruction. Mm-hmm. Now we were talking also about differentiated assessment. And I've watched, and I've been in classes at both all the schools where I've seen, and for example, in the reading groups in a literacy block at Miller Driscoll or Cider Mill, where you'll have 4 different groups of kids reading at different levels, all being assessed in different ways because of what Tim just said. In other words, there are kids in a 3rd grade class who are reading chapter books with no pictures and lots of more dense content, down to kids who are reading at a much lower level. And I've watched them have the teacher assess them differently based on their skill level. And I think one of the things that we're working on with ERP are tests that, and one of the problems we face with standardized testing for our high achievers is that they max out on the tests. And so and kids who may not be at the other end of the continuum may get frustrated after they answer a few questions and then hit the wall. So what is the test really measuring, so that we're working with the direction testing is taking is going to look at tests that are branching kinds of tests that really, once they've taken a baseline of where the student is, they may probe deeper at that level with a kid. And the kid who's the high flyer, they're going to take off maybe into the next level of material.
Well,
so it's a whole different way of assessing.
Suffer because a teacher thinks, well, you're doing fine, and I'm going to give, but I think you're capable of more, so I'm going to give you a B because you could have done more.
Yeah, I don't know if it's about the grade. I think the assessments, what we're talking about, I think they're going to give a kid the level of assessment that they believe he or she is able to tackle, so that they're getting a realistic view. So you really don't, if a test is a very simple test, what have you really learned from that as a student or as a teacher about what the kid really can do? So how do you do it to give gradations of difficulty to challenge the kid? But there's ways of adjusting that too, so you're not penalizing, to your point, kids who are high flyers. I think that's what you were.
Yeah.
So that's not the purpose, but it does give you diagnostic data that's going to help determine where the kid goes.
Laura?
Oh, I was just going to say, then that's where assessment doesn't equal grading. Assessment's much deeper and broader than that.
Right, exactly. And I think, we've used, it's so simplistic. I mean, that people will take a snapshot in time, which is a standardized test, and make judgments about either a school or a teacher based on a given snapshot. I would challenge any organization, any corporation to come in, to have an outside group come in and take a snapshot of one variable in their organization and make a judgment that it's a crappy company or deserves to be out of business, or is a great company based on that. And I think we feel that there is some misunderstanding about what tests mean, and I think we want to broaden the dialogue to help people understand, as Tim just did, that the standardized tests are a piece, part of a broader panorama or broader array of measures of what kids know and can do. And look at those of us around this table. Some of us may be great test takers, some of us may not, but some of us might be great collaborators, some of us may be great creative people.
Spellers.
What's that?
Spellers.
By the way, we're still waiting for the Board of Ed. Cowardice has been clearly articulated by... I'm sorry, I rambled on.
I think this is a good starting point, and that the next logical point of conversation is, now that we have the assessments, we know what they are, we need to talk about how we use them to improve student learning and student achievement. Is that something that you or Lynn will be talking about when you next present the results?
It's actually been a point of emphasis. Interesting you raised the issue over the summer months and into the fall months in working with our instructional teams throughout the district. Really trying to promote conversations, not just about the results, not just about the analysis and the disaggregation, but what's your action plan to respond to this data in a way that will impact either an individual's learning environment or a group.
Yeah, because we've talked quite a bit about RTI Studio and
Yeah.
SRBI and
Right.
those things.
It really gets into developing a plan of action based on the data
Right.
that can help.
But those tend to be quantitative as opposed to qualitative, and so RTI Studio sort of pushes you down one particular path.
Well,
And what-
RTI Studio tends to push you down a path based on quantitative
Mhm.
analysis.
Mhm.
But you shouldn't underestimate how performance-based assessments are used routinely in our classrooms to develop, particularly through formative assessment, qualitative type responses that can impact how a teacher would move forward and impact a student's learning ability. You know, the problem, it's not a problem, but it's a fact that increasingly our classrooms are modeled around the world in which we live. We've talked a lot about 21st century learning. So when you're trying to promote instructional learning designs that emphasize collaboration, creativity, innovation, looking at the use of research, your assessments have to mirror that in a way. So that's why we're trying to, one of the main themes tonight is to try to emphasize with the board how important the performance-based side is, as well as the standardized side.
You know, yesterday, Cheryl and Tim and Ellen Tuckner and I had a chance. Tri-State had one of its member meetings. I'm on the board, so I had a board meeting ahead of that. But one of the things we talked about at the board meeting, and I haven't had a chance to debrief much with Tim or the principals, is that about 17 of the tri-state districts of the 40 in the consortium have been working with a outside consultant on a performance, developing some authentic performance measures. And there's going to be a gallery walk and where we'd have tables to talk about, and it's really best practice kind of work on October 24th, I believe. I think it's going to be probably down near SUNY Purchase there. So I'll get more information out and see if there anybody interested, because I know that you've been and the principals have been working on performance-based assessments, and I think it would be very instructive to see some of the great work that's come out of that. I got a template on the Chappaqua model of performance assessment, and I believe I have copies that I'll give out to the principals, Tim, anybody who's interested, to kind of see one way of looking at what a quality performance assessment looks like. One of the things Tim mentioned that, again, you've seen many examples of is the use of rubrics and of having a way of setting out the criteria. And I've seen some wonderful work in our schools where teachers will sit and they will look at student work, written essays, and using a rubric, the ERB writing rubric, which is a great one, they will sit down and decide whether this paper is a 1 paper or a 6 paper, and really talk about the qualities that differentiate average writing from quality writing. And I think one of the things that good performance assessments do, as Tim said, how many times did we have classes where it was kind of a hidden agenda as to what the professor was looking for, the teacher was looking for? And I think with this approach, you're saying, here's how you will be assessed at the end. It's not going to be a guessing game. You're going to be assessed on, can you do these kinds of things, given what we've been teaching you to do.
The focal point was always going to be on the student. And I just think back to the town hall meetings, the the budget meetings that we've had with the public, the League of Women Voters, and every time, and also through emails and other things, we continue to get comments from the community wanting to measure Wilton based on standardized tests, and looking for that one element. Where do you sit within the Connecticut schools or within the national schools? And yet this seems to be focused on a feedback loop to the child, where the teacher is just is understanding what motivates the child, how the child learns. And I think the parents can appreciate the approach that this assessment techniques takes.
Just trying to broaden the perspective.
And I think that's something that the the town of Wilton should appreciate and try to understand, as opposed to just looking at standardized tests. But it's that feedback loop to the student that is so important tonight.
And I think we have a responsibility to be very clear when we celebrate, for example, that we're #1 in the state of Connecticut on the SATs in our reading and writing performance. Well, that's great. That's outstanding. But I think you'll always hear us say, and I know Principal O'Donnell talked about this in a recent press article, how it's just part of the mosaic of the assessments that we look at to gauge the quality of our school district. You have to be careful about that. But we will celebrate that.
I think this also goes to explaining, a lot of people don't understand what teachers do when they're not in the classroom, interacting with the students, which obviously is very important, but there's a lot of work that goes on when they're not actually in the classroom. I think this goes to...
As a teacher grows in his or her work, if you were to be part of the evaluation process early on in their career, you're talking about management, instructional design, the how to teach. But then very quickly, those conversations all become about assessment. How do you know your students are learning? And that's where it gets really complex.
That's the importance of professional development.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Well, this is really exciting, what I'm about to discuss with you. It really is. It's Connecticut's new accountability system. And you may or may not know, I think we've mentioned that Connecticut recently applied for a waiver with the federal government to bypass the No Child Left Behind legislation. And that waiver was granted by the United States Department of Education in May. And as a result, we now have a new accountability system in place beginning this year. Part of the waiver provides us with an opportunity to look at how we use our Connecticut Mastery Test data and our Connecticut Academic Performance Test data in a way that many would interpret as more meaningful. So you won't hear us talking about annual yearly progress anymore and NCLB sanctions, which I think is a good thing. As you know, the NCLB approach really, I think, created targets that were just unrealistic for school districts to achieve. So this approach in Connecticut now, if you look at the 2011-2012 timeline, you're really moving away from AYP and NCLB sanctions, so that in 2012-2013, we're going to be looking at new performance targets. And I think one of the main tenets of this work, if you look at the NCLB indicators, you're really talking about performance at the proficient level. And for those of you who know, that's level 3 on the CMT and the CAP tests. The Connecticut's approach is they're trying to capture student growth, student improvement across the bands, if you will. And this, according to the Connecticut approach, it values improvement at all levels. And it gives us metrics that paint a fuller and richer picture of a student's performance, allows us to set what we think are more meaningful goals. But at the same time, the state's moving away from the proficient layer of performance, which is the NCLB standard, the federal standard, to really emphasize the gold standard. So very quickly, if you do this comparison now, NCLB, the target is proficient. Now in Connecticut, the target is gold. As opposed to getting to 100% by 2014, in other words, all students in Connecticut would perform at the proficient level by 2014. I'll show you in a minute how Connecticut's designed a system where we're going to try to get halfway to a target outcome by 2018. Now all the content areas are involved, math, reading, writing, and science. Again, counting progress between all the levels. We're not going to get into it tonight, but high school graduation rates are part of the conversation. And the subgroup size gets lowered from 40 to 20, and that's going to impact Wilton in terms of some of the other subgroup metrics we're going to have to look at. So in NCLB, we were looking at trying to move students to the proficient level. Under the new Connecticut system, you're actually going to be rewarded for moving students up a band, from proficient to gold, from basic to proficient, below basic to basic. So as a result of that, you're going to now see us discuss what is described as a performance index. It ranges between 0 and 100. It looks at grade levels. It captures performance across performance bands, all subjects that I stated. It incorporates all tested students now, even students who are challenged learners that take the MOS or the skills checklist. It gets into subject-specific conversations, overall indexes, and again, as I mentioned, the subgroup calculation becomes more important now that the size of that sample is 20. What will happen now is when a student performs at a certain level, they're going to assign a credit value. And you see those values up there on the screen ranging from 0 to 1. And then also, again, the MOS and checklist will be assigned values. And what's going to happen, I'm going to go through this quickly, is for example, if a 5th grader scores at the goal level, that will be assigned a value of 1. If their writing is at the proficient level, that's going to be assigned a value of 0.67. And then science and math you see there as well. And what happens is they average those scores to get their performance index to 67. You do that then for all the students in the cohort, whether it's the district or the grade level, you average those scores and you get the overall 5th grade performance index, for example. So it's an interesting formulaic approach to measure growth. How do I get out of here, Mr. Hepford? Got it. So just as an example, let's say you had 100 students get involved in the CMT, the MOS, or the skills checklist. 17 score at the advanced level. They're assigned a point value of 1. So you see the 17 points. 20 at goal, multiplied by 1 as well. 30 at proficient, then you're multiplying by 0.67. 15 at basic, 0.33, and then the below basic. You take the MOS and the skills checklist assignments, you add up all those scores, and because we're dealing with 100 students, your average is the sum total of that, and you get the performance index of 64. So in the past, you heard us say that 69% of our students were performing at the proficient level. You're going to hear us now talk about the performance index. In this case, would be 64. So you see the shift. And by the way, as you might suspect, Wilton students in general are going to score in the 90s on the performance index because typically over 80% of our students are in the goal or advanced range, the mastery levels. So, and both of those get assigned a 1. So you're going to see performance indexes for most of our larger cohorts in the 90s in Wilton. We're going to talk more about that in a month. So again, now, how can a school increase its performance index? Well, in the past, we would only be able to look at getting students into that proficient band, and now you can actually, if we're looking at 9 students, for example, you could only get 9 from basic to proficient, and now you could actually, as you see in the example here, you could move 3 students from each of those bands to the next band and realize the same kind of success. So this is important. As educators, it really gives us an opportunity to really try to promote growth in our students. Not that we don't do it already, but this system rewards that growth in a way, numerically in terms of the index that's used. Now the state's target over 12 years to get the performance index of all of our schools here in Connecticut, our districts, at the 88 level. And what they've done is they're taking the student performance index, they're using a 3-year average based on performance of the last 3 years and establishing a baseline. And they're drawing that straight line up to 88. And you can see that the goal I mentioned earlier is to get halfway to the target by 2018. And hopefully to 88 by a 12-year period. Now, as you might suspect in Wilton, we're already, as I just mentioned, our performance index, and you'll hear about this in November, we're in the 90s. In all of our performance indexes. So we're going to have to maintain that performance. Where we are going to have to do a great deal of work is in our special education subgroup. You're going to find performance indexes in our special education subgroup with baselines that are below 88. So we're going to have to draw that straight line, and we're going to have to show incremental improvement in our special education subgroup performance over time. So I hope you can appreciate, I do, that this is a more meaningful and I think appropriate way to try to demonstrate growth and improvement across a grade level, a school, a district, compared to the NCLB approach that we used to manage in the past. Now, schools will eventually, not this year, but next year, will receive classifications based on their performance. If you're an excelling school, that will mean that you have met all state targets in your subgroups, in your overall groups. You'll be 88 or higher. And that's going to be very challenging to get to. 88 or higher on all the subgroup and overall cohort scores. Progressing means you're meeting annual targets. So if you have incremental increases, if you meet those targets in your growth, then you'll be defined as progressing, even if you're not up to the 88 level yet. And then transitioning schools will have, there'll be situations there where they haven't met their target. So conceivably, we could have a special education subgroup with a target level that we don't reach, and we could get into this situation where we're defined as transitioning. So even though we're, as you know, a high-performing school district. So anyways, you can see that it took me about 10-15 minutes to go through this, and this is 10 to 15 minutes that we don't have to spend in November. We can just get to the data. So I apologize for the length of this presentation, but we do have to start thinking in terms of this work. And what's really interesting, not to diminish the importance of our state-mandated tests in the next 2 years, is this week, for the first time, we were able to look at test sample items from the Smarter Balanced Consortium for the new tests that are coming in 3 years that are aligned with the Common Core. And our first glance suggests these are going to be challenging test items that our students are going to be exposed to that get really into what we were talking about before. Really try to make an effort to measure the extent to which students, what they know and what they can do. And I'm feeling comfortable that at least in our language arts and math environment, we have a good head start on what's coming in 3 years. So anyways, I hope you appreciate this new approach in Connecticut. I think they got it right.
I have one question, Tim. Is the number of students tested still a factor? We've talked about getting to that 95% of students tested, and it takes all of March to get all the makeups done so we can get there.
Well, I don't. This is new to us. I'm going to have to follow up on that. I know that was a metric we looked at with NCLB.
Right.
I don't know if, in fact, that's something that will reflect adversely on a school district if they don't get to that performance level. I know our goal in Wilton is that 100% of our students will take these assessments. So irrespective of how the state will manage that, our goal in Wilton is to make sure every one of our students takes these assessments at the appropriate level.
You have to believe it will be a factor. Otherwise, you could skew your results by just giving the test at a time when you know some kids are going to be away that might be a drag on the average. So I think you're going to see that kind of a requirement.
Is this similar to other states, or is this just sort of purely come under the Connecticut Department of Education?
I can't answer that question definitively, but I do know that many states are trying to develop what are described as value-added models around this work, so that you're able to measure to a greater extent a system that does reward these incremental shifts in growth over time, whether that's at the individual level or group levels. So I don't know to what extent the Connecticut system is typical of other states.
Well, we heard yesterday, I think Cheryl may remember better than I or Tim, but one of the problems with some of that's happened in some of the other situations that occurred in other states is that numbers of students were failing the state tests. So what they did is to show improvement, so politicians could pound the table and say, we've improved test scores, they dummied down the tests. And sure enough, the results came up. But where they got caught is although their trajectory might have been looking good, like the so-called Texas miracle, which I think proved to be somewhat less than a miracle, is that when they take the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, students who who had been on this great trajectory were not performing very well at all. And I think there was another example, I can't remember, Cheryl, the other measurements that they had, but there are ways of looking. So I think that Connecticut is trying to be very transparent about what they're doing with this, and I think they're not dumbing down the tests. They're making them rigorous, and I think that the challenge is going to be, as Tim said, districts that have struggled in the past, I think will continue to have a steep hill, but at least they're not going to, to look at our urban counterparts, and it makes me crazy, I think, to say, because I've seen heroic teaching done in many of our districts that are less advantaged. But to say they're failing districts, I think with this approach, where you can say, okay, how many of the students have moved on the continuum? So it's not an absolute number, because our kids should be at the higher end. And it's for a lot of reasons. Test scores are correlated very strongly with the number of bedrooms in a community, in the average home. And so I think what this measure does, and why I agree with Tim's assessment, is that you're going to see districts getting credit for moving kids along a continuum, rather than saying, gee, they didn't hit mastery, so they're failing. Because they've taken kids who may be way behind in the relay race of life, and they've moved them along. And I think they should be getting credit for
on the
that.
slide is establishing the baseline and looking at 88, 12 years out. You have the ability to really look at an incremental approach that may be, and hopefully will be, manageable for any school. The challenge we're going to face in Wilton, as I said, is we're in the 90s, so our word's going to be maintain.
Questions, comments? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Tim.
We'll move on to the 2013-14 budget assumptions.
Well, you have in front of you our 2013-2014 budget assumptions, and I'd like the board to realize that in effect this document is very consistent with last year's document that led to the development of this year's budget. You may recall that we had a significant rewrite of our budget assumptions a year ago to align the work with the strategic plan. So as you read through the document, in that initial paragraph, you see a restatement of our overarching goal as it relates to the strategic plan. We do talk about some very important general themes around providing adequate resources, our philosophy around continuous improvement, making sure there's flexibility within our budget, school facilities, of course, important in terms of maintenance and improvement, and then we think the all-important bullet in that first section of the document, we want to make sure we're developing a budget that represents value in the eyes of the community. So then when you get into the layer of specificity, you'll talk about the extent to that we hope our budget protects our organizational structures in our schools, whether that's the cottage, house, team model. For example, we do have a highly competent faculty and staff. We want to make sure that our budget supports that. Class size, of course. We have added the fourth bullet, partly due to some of the feedback we received from the board last year around making sure we're providing necessary resources to support the social and emotional needs of our students. It's just a fact that many more additional students are presenting to us with social and emotional concerns. And we felt it important to actually lay that out there for consideration as we develop our budget and to seek your endorsement of how important that is.
If you talk to Tim's point, if you talk to Ann, if you talk to any of our terrific principals out there, they will, to a person, tell you what they've seen on a daily basis with regards to social and emotional issues that we're dealing with in ways that are give us great concern, and because they are issues that affect a kid's ability to access the learning if they're dealing with some of the social emotional issues. And it's to a person, every principal has seen a quantum leap in the increase in kids who are presenting with some challenging issues.
And we did have a discussion at budget time last year about the need for more social workers and so forth.
And we added this year to the high school, got some additional social work time because we could not, Kim Zemo was, we couldn't clone her, but we got a great partner to come in and give her some support in providing social work services.
And then, of course, the document goes on to talk about the importance of maintaining a relevant and meaningful curriculum, or make sure our instruction and assessment practices represent best practices, our technology infrastructure and training program, the various mandates that are in place, including our obligations under special education, our various contractual obligations, board policies and practices, and then, of course, what we really do consider to be quite important, very important in our process, is that we are looking for cost containment efforts, including the efficient use of resources and other ways to save energy, for example, in our work in developing a budget that the town can appreciate and hopefully approve down the road. So I've done all the talking, but certainly it would be remiss of me not to talk about the role that Ken Post plays in this process. We routinely recognize that we need to pat Ken on the back because he writes the checks and he does a great job in managing this process for us. So he's really out front and center in this work.
But he's
Be
a
glad
man of
to
fewer
take-
words.
Fewer words and smaller checks, yes.
We'll be glad to take your questions and we'll have Ken answer them.
I have a languaging suggestion on the next to the last bullet. Having it read, provides funding to implement all Board of Education policies and practices. I think that reads a little bit better. And then I have to ask on the last bullet about whether or not we want to be specific and say initiatives to reduce energy consumption. In our budget subcommittee this morning, we were talking about the other things that we have done, like renegotiating contracts and buying oil with the town and so forth.
Right.
So I don't know if that's the right focus, the initiatives to reduce consumption.
Right.
Maybe we want to be less specific, or maybe just say reflects continuing cost containment efforts. I don't know. I throw that out there.
Like last year, we were very specific on energy.
We were,
And
and I don't know if that's our
Should-
focus
yeah.
again this year.
Mhm.
And especially since we have a new director of facilities, I don't know if he is as focused on that as the previous one.
Right. There is something to be said to representing continuing cost containment efforts. It is a broader, more all-inclusive way of looking at that. And I think we have a good story to tell. I don't think we always, personally, who cares what I think, I'll say it anyway, is that we don't always get credit for the efforts we have made. And that there are some areas that the board is well aware of that are more difficult to contain costs in. And I think there are legal and other reasons that explain some of those areas that are big, have a big impact on our budget. But it doesn't mean that we are shying away from looking at how we can contain costs.
I'd certainly
That's it
support a
for
more
me.
generalized approach rather than specifically on energy.
Yeah. I think that's where I come down as well.
Other thoughts or?
I have nothing.
Good.
I thought it was very good. It was very comprehensive.
And again, this is for the benefit of the public. I think this is a step along what is a long journey of many miles. And we will. Ken has been gathering, as we talked in the budget work group this morning. Ken has been throughout the summer has been gathering data about things that will impact our budget, so that as we begin to develop it, we have some idea and some estimates, some of which, and he's done some good work about showing where we can reasonably expect costs and areas that are a little bit more volatile. And I think one of the things, as you know, with health costs being relatively volatile given the small number of people, although it's a little bigger now with the town, that we have to be careful as to when you put the marker down that says health benefits are going to cost us this much, because a lot of that is dependent upon your experience rates. And Ken is tracking that on a monthly basis and really looking at it weekly in some cases to try and I think the more accurate projections are going to be based later in this year, which is why we don't come out with a budget in October. I mean, there are too many unknowns at this point. The enrollment projections, Ellen Essman, Molly's been working to coordinate. Ellen's, we had data collection on October 1, and it takes some time for Ellen to put together her projections, which will be reported to the board the next meeting. So I think that's a piece. And then looking at some of the programmatic things Tim alluded to, some of the technology piece that Matt and the ILs and principals and so on are looking at. So this is a beginning point, but there's a lot of work that's ongoing to develop what we hope will be a thoughtful and acceptable budget.
Thank you. And we'll move on to the policy 5141.
Ready?
Ready.
All right, here we go. Another round of policies for everyone. And we start with the very exciting health services program policy.
Holding our breath.
Please don't. I don't need you to pass out.
Jane does not like to be referred to as a policy wonk.
Yes, no, thank you. It's becoming quite a
Well, I know, ever
enjoyable
since you've
task.
arrived,
Yeah.
you seem to be doing a lot more policies.
That's right.
I hope to slow down once Ken gets in charge, once it becomes his season. So for this policy, this is a current existing policy. We've made a few minor changes to it that really are reflective of changes in the state regulations. The state is very clear that it does not want there to be a time period for which students have the opportunity to get their vaccinations prior to enrollment. The expectation is that a student will come fully immunized, which is probably not a word, unless they have religious concerns. So we have removed, as you can see in the third section, the language that allows students and their families to have 30 calendar days prior to, or once they've enrolled. So we've removed that language. And then in the last paragraph, there is the inclusion and the reference to the state statute, or section 19A7F, which allows us to, as the vaccination languages change and they add new vaccinations and take vaccinations away, this will allow the board's policy to be able to stand on its own as those regulations change. Therefore, so shall the board's policy change. So there won't require a change in the policy every time. And then there's just the inclusion of the language about the second immunization required against measles prior to entering 7th grade. Questions?
Seems pretty straightforward.
And I think each, just so the boards, you may be aware of this, but I think our nurses, and there's a lot of procedural due process information that goes out to parents, so that if you have some cases of a kid who is denied entry, this is not new information to the parents, and it's difficult. You have a small handful of people. But I think in the day of the urgent care clinics, many of these people are able to, who haven't gotten their immunizations, take their kids and be able to have them enter school in a timely fashion. In the past, they'd have to wait until they could get into their doctor's office.
What's the definition of the appropriate parental notice? Is that defined in the regulations?
It is not. It is not. So it would just be at the discretion there of the school district.
School.
Certainly phone calls, letters, emails. any attempt to get and reach the parents so that we can communicate this information, because the last thing we want to do is deny a child educational opportunities. So it's really in our best interest to make sure we have that contact.
Okay.
Anyone have any questions? Should we put that on as an action item for next time?
On the consent
Mhm.
calendar?
Yeah.
Or maybe we shouldn't,
No.
because there are other
That's what I
board
was thinking.
members who aren't here.
Put it on the, down to action items.
Okay.
All righty. Moving on. Okay, so this is actually kind of a, I think, kind of a cool one that gets to get changed. It's the policy relating to HIV/AIDS. I certainly very clearly remember that it was this huge thing, and if somebody had AIDS, and there was a kind of a timestamp on their life, and that's no longer the case. And so as a result, it's great to be able to now have a policy that reflects that. As you will see, the old policy and the regulation have been completely withdrawn, and the new policy is very clear in its stating that there is no risk of having students or staff members who have HIV, AIDS, or ARP as part of our general population and inclusion. And therefore, we don't treat them any differently. We have no right or need to know about anyone's medical status with regards to these, with this condition. And therefore, we don't ask, we won't ask, and we will just treat all as they come.
Looked fine to me.
Okay.
Chris? Anything?
No.
No?
A policy I find a little less exciting. And it could just be because I hope not to need it right now, is the use of the AEDs, the automatic external defibrillators. I will say I've become quite well versed in AEDs. Sure, hope I never have to use one, but if I do, I've got a great knowledge of policy regarding it. So it is a current policy that is the Board of Education's. I do not believe that there is a need at this time to make any changes to the policy. I certainly welcome conversations and concerns regarding the policy information.
In the third paragraph,
Yes.
It talks about discipline.
Uh-huh.
I assume for someone who inappropriately accesses or uses it, I assume that there's a Good Samaritan statute in Connecticut that protects someone who tries to use it to actually save a life.
Yes, absolutely. And so if you look at that second general state statute, 52-557B,
Right.
that is pretty, I have the actual policy here, but it is that Good Samaritan law, which holds one harmless from any attempts or harm that they may cause to someone as a result of trying to use the defibrillator in the appropriate manner. Now, there is the language in the policy that we do and will take disciplinary action for people who use it in a what's the right terminology that we've used? In an inappropriate manner. Playing, hey, let's just see if this thing works.
Right.
That kind of thing is certainly frowned upon, and we will take action if need be. And they're not held harmless in that instance. And then the regulation, there are no changes that I have suggested as a result of the regulation, but there's certainly, if there's comments or questions.
I just had questions about whether or not we have sufficient AEDs in the district. And I asked that because we have after-school programs that take place when nurses' offices might be closed. We have the continuing education program at Middlebrook, and I asked that sort of as a policy question. Do we have enough, or what is our intent? Is it just to protect the students and the faculty when school is in session, or do we have a broader intent to protect anyone who is using our facilities from the community.
As a non-voting member of the Board of Education, if you look under the section B, number 1, it says during school hours, the AED will be at designated locations. I think it's in everyone's best. I think it's better for the Board of Education to be remain focused on the students and staff during the school day and providing the best care during the school day to students and staff, and keeping that as the Board of Education's focus. I think broadening that, there could be the opportunity for potential problems as a board in terms of liability. And these are expensive machines. They're not, they're not things that you really necessarily want to have people who have a lot of access who don't have any kind of training or experience with them at all, having access to them.
Is there any state law that relates to this in terms of the number of that you should have?
No, there is not. No, the state law really just references the Good Samaritan nature of it, that if you have it and you try it and you use it, that's wonderful, and you will be held harmless. That's the only speaking in the statute to that.
And then on the next page, you talk about training, so I assume that there is, in fact, a requirement for training if you have it.
Yes, and actually, interestingly enough, I discovered this in my studies, is that part of the first aid CPR certification course is training in AEDs. So anyone who does have that first aid certification is also a trained person on how to use an AED machine. So therefore, all of our school nurses, every year, they are required to become first aid CPR certified, and so they have that. I am in conversations right now, actually, with John Murphy to talk about the feasibility or the need potentially for all of our custodians to receive CPR and first aid training, and therefore they would all automatically have it. A few of the custodians received that training, the AED specific training, 2 years ago, but we want to look at expanding that and making sure that they're updated. Every year, the theater and field house managers receive the procedures for how to use the AED machines, so they are following and in compliance with this as well.
How about the coaches?
Yes, the coaches are all CPR first aid certified, so they have that. So it's kind of nice that it's in that package already.
I would assume that the high school athletic trainer is as well?
Yes, he's CPR first aid certified.
And we've been looking at whether or not we want to have our administrators have an opportunity for first aid. We've all been trained, but you get a refresher course and get us up to speed again. It's finding the time and getting a critical mass of people to go through. But it's a couple hours, I think.
It is.
Under D6,
Yes.
I think there's just a little languaging issue here. I think it should read head custodian of each school and the Wilton High School plant manager. I think the high school is the only school that has a plant manager.
Okay.
And then down below in 2, the last bullet, there's a reference to supervisor support services. I think that's a reference to John Murphy's position, and it's just a title that needs to be changed.
Okay. Yes, and I did need to, the policy was last done in 2003, so we just need to look to see in 2003 who that was and make sure we update it accordingly.
And then in that same bullet, it seems that if the problems are reported to that person, that the regulations should specify the next step, that they do something to get the problem fixed.
I'm sorry, say that again.
And if you just look at E1 under the medical control, that where it talks about that all problems should be, well, that second bullet, or the third bullet, refers to the supervisor of support services. In number 1, E1, it actually refers back to that the district school medical advisor is the person who reviews all of the completed reports and has to report anytime an AED is activated, and understands and complies with the requirements of it and follows the more detailed guidelines of the AED program. So perhaps even there may be some need to further clarify the role of where the problem should be reported to, because it may in fact need to be the district medical advisor as opposed to John Murphy.
So John would then, the next step for him would be to take it
To
to the
report it,
district
right.
medical advisor, who would advise him as to what to do. Okay.
Right. So I will get further clarification on
I
that
think
for
that
our
section
next.
2 is referring to, if it's not, if the machine is not working or something is wrong with the machine, that John's office is the one that makes sure the annual
Right.
maintenance is done on them. I don't think it's anything to do with
The reporting of an incident.
Yeah, exactly, the reporting of an incident. I think it's 2 separate things.
Okay.
And then is John the person responsible for getting it
Yes.
fixed?
Yes,
and
he is.
Yeah,
replaced?
and
Yeah,
that's the
what-
step that I
yeah.
wanted
Right.
to see in here.
Right.
If there's something wrong with it, let's get
Yeah.
it fixed and make sure that it's
That's the way
working.
he would do it.
Okay, so
Fire
I'll
extinguishers,
add that
other
language
Right,
there.
right.
Equipment.
Okay.
Any thoughts, Karen?
In 3, it seems that the data will be downloaded within 24 hours of the use of the AED.
Yes. Yes.
And that the school nurse where the AED was used is the one who sends the copies to the medical advisor?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I have.
Okay, I think we should leave those on for review and discuss for next week. For next
Alrighty.
meeting.
Review and discuss,
We're-
discuss and approve.
Well, I think,
Discuss and approve.
what's your feelings? Giving Lori and Bruce a chance to comment on them. We're having some changes made.
Well, if they have,
We can pull it, we can
can
say,
pull
we'll
it.
bring it back
Okay.
again if
Yeah.
if they have objections
Okay.
to them.
Mhm.
Put it on discuss and approve, we don't have to approve. We can
Right.
pull it.
Okay,
Right.
so we'll put them all under action items.
Okay. All
And
right.
we'll should move on to the action item,
Okay. Moving right along.
5141.2.
I would move that we approve this as it's presented to
Yeah.
us.
Agreed? And I-
Yeah, I had concerns about it last time, and thank you for providing the additional information, and I think it's good. Good.
I have a motion?
I guess that was discussion, I jumped up.
Oh.
I made the motion, Laura seconded.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And now we move on to the timeline?
No.
No.
Sorry.
the,
Sorry, we have
We have to
the.
go back to the coaches.
4115.
Oh, that's right, sorry.
Athletic coach.
That's right, athletic coaches.
These are the changes that we discussed last
Last time.
Yeah, so yes, and so there's been a few things that have happened since then, so I wanted to bring it back. So 2 or 3 meetings ago, when I first presented this, we had the conversation regarding, if you look under 2, in that first paragraph, the inclusion of the word except as follows. At that point, except was in there. We again then came back and then said, no, we can go ahead and take it out. This afternoon, I spoke with one of our attorneys, and she said, you know what, I've actually been thinking about that since we last talked. I've been talked about it with a few other people, and that language needs to stay in. But what we needed to do is, instead of removing that language, it was reshuffling the paragraphs in the way it was presented, because it was leaving things a little bit confusing. So the language except needs to stay in there, because a coach who has not been with us for 3 or more years can be non-renewed or terminated at any time. So the except and the language under preceding it or underneath is for coaches who have been here for 3 or more years. So therefore, it's kind of just delineating out what needs to happen for a coach who's been here for 3 more years, and just to simply say, if they have not, they may be terminated or non-renewed at any time. So there's nothing in terms of the content that's different. It's merely a presentation difference and clarification. That being said, or if we're comfortable with that point, then I will go on and say, I then also have, as a point of information for the board, I take the stance that it's always in my duty as labor relations, not just as policy guru, self-proclaimed now guru, that what I do need to do is I have a responsibility to present to the board when union memberships have concerns or have raised concerns over policies, and this is the case with this such policy. I had a conversation with the teachers union. They have raised a number of issues and concerns. Most specifically, they have a concern with the limitation of, if you look under the hearing procedures, where the board has stated that 10 days is a reasonable time frame within which the athletic coach can say that they would like to file an appeal. The teachers union has said that they would like to see that expanded. I'm comfortable with the presentation that 10 is a reasonable number of days, and my recommendation would be to proceed with it as is.
Did they come back with a
number?
number?
They did not. They did not. They just did not feel that that was a reasonable time frame. But in the course of a term, 10 days is 2 full work weeks, and that's, I feel, a reasonable time period. In addition, if you go down to 3D, there was concern with the language arbitrary and capricious. The teachers union had indicated that they would like to see that language be changed to reflect just cause, so without just cause. However, what I shared with them today is that the language arbitrary and capricious is really about the standard of law. So it's the bar at which the board can determine if the superintendent's action is arbitrary and capricious. The board will not be making a determination on if the superintendent's decision is without just cause or with just cause. This is not a teacher. This is a coach. They are separate. They do not have those same standards. And in addition, the board's action will only be for it to be arbitrary and capricious.
That's
and
a
not
term
to,
of art, yeah.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes. And then the other point, oh goodness. Okay, no, I think we are, we're okay. Those were their main issues of concern. So I did want to share those with the board. As I said, as the policy presents before you, I think it's a fair policy, and I would recommend that you take action on it, but I am not a voting member of the Board of Education.
Have you had implemented a similar policy in a different district?
I have worked...
Personnel person?
I have worked with this policy as exactly stated in 2 prior districts.
Okay.
This is the language that most of our DRGA districts are represented by Shipman Goodman, and I think this is language that they have put in place in their districts as well. So it is pretty well vetted.
I had a chance to implement the policy as well with the superintendent and found it to be a very helpful policy.
To have in place?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, very much so.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the 10-day appeal
Okay.
period.
As am I.
Somebody's going to know within 10
Yeah.
days whether or
Yeah.
not they're going to appeal.
In my experience,
they
know within a
It shouldn't
day.
be dragged out.
No.
Oh, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I do remember what the other issue was, and I do need to be fair. The teachers union, with regards to the information that is presented to the coach by the superintendent for their decision, the teachers union would like there to be a requirement of the superintendent to provide, if requested, the reasons in writing for the non-renewal or termination recommendation. The state statute does not require that be written. It merely references that they need to be notified. So it is my recommendation that we certainly just stay with the policy as is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Stay with the statute.
Yeah.
But I did want to, I want to make sure that I always present the information that's presented to me, to you.
The package has been presented to the union. They come back with their
Correct.
suggestions, and we can accept or reject them. Yes.
Yes.
Then
Should we?
I would move that we approve this policy as it's presented to us tonight.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. We have the timeline. I think we'll have the next meeting will be at the normal Thursday night meeting. And then, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe in the meetings in November, we have them on Monday.
November 5th.
Monday, November 5th.
And then it's the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Okay. And then in December, we have the meeting, normal Thursday meeting, first of the month, and then we have the 3 o'clock meeting for the budget review. Okay. Any other questions in the timeline, comments? Okay. And at the end of the meeting, we ask if there's any members of the public that would like to address the board. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in second? And all in favor? Good.